I happen to believe that you've sold us out. I happen to believe that once you...
Mr. Turner, just 1 second.
Once any
you
nation,
do not have a monopoly on patriotism. And I resent...
Okay, I recognize those voices. That's John Turner and Brian Mulroney from either the 84 debate or 88 election. Catherine, why are we playing 4-decade-old tape?
1988, and Jason, we're playing it because, of course, this is debate week in the election campaign. I'm trying to hype us up with a classic moment from a past debate. One, in this case, that really made a difference at the time. And also, the topic is pretty timely now, right? Canada-U.S. trade.
We built a country, east and west and north. We built it on an infrastructure that deliberately resisted the continental pressure of the United States. For 120 years, we've done it. With one signature of a pen. You've reversed that, thrown us into the north-south influence of the United States, and will reduce us, I'm sure, to a colony of the United States, because when the economic levers go, the political independence is sure to follow.
I remember that moment. It didn't make John Turner win the election, but the Liberals did do much better than we originally thought. Kind of brought them back from the dead, I guess.
Yeah, and that does go to show the power of a good debate. I'm Catherine Cullen, host of CBC's The House.
I'm Daniel Thibeault, host of Radio-Canada's political show, Les Coulisses du Pouvoir.
And I'm Jason Markusoff, producer and writer for CBC in Calgary.
And together, we are House Party, a weekly podcast diving into the big, burning questions driving us toward Election Day. And this, our favorite week as political nerds, we are asking, could these debates decide the election? Okay, so let's do a little survey here, friends. I have to admit, I'm pretty excited about these debates. I want to know how you guys are feeling. Jason?
So I'm going to let people know about the real bias of journalism. It's not left. It's not right. We are biased towards change and dynamic. We want things to happen. And this election, although things changed a lot before this election, the polls have been pretty static and not a lot has really changed the things. So what makes me excited for the debate is that this could be the last best way for things in this campaign, the dynamic in the campaign, the narrative to shift. So that makes me excited and hopeful.
But it probably won't. And then that's...
So much for hopeful.
And well, there's a wet towel.
No, but that's one of those, like, it's part of the campaign. It has to happen. It's happening on the last leg of the campaign. Everyone is super prudent. And I don't expect this to be overly exciting. We have to watch it because in case something happened, but I don't have much hopes.
Okay, sometimes I have to do like devil's advocate on the show. Not this week. I am so excited for these debates. I cannot wait. I always get really excited about political debates because even though I acknowledge, Dan, you're right, like there's a lot of stagecraft and these things are quite contrived, I still think that you inevitably learn a bit of something about the candidates, and these ones in particular, I think, are going to be so interesting because we've never seen these folks, these guys, because they are all men, face off before, right? Mark Carney, it's not like we've had months and months and months of question period and it's just going to be the same old debate. Other than, I think maybe 1-2 committee hearings, we've never seen Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre go head-to-head. We've never seen them in the same room talking to one another before. So I just think there are so many interesting dynamics that could come of this. There's some real risk, too, with questions about Mark Carney's French. I'm fascinated. Like, I've had the popcorn ready for days.
Let's do the French thing first, because I think it might be the one thing that we'll be looking a little more carefully for on Wednesday night. But we've been watching his French all through the campaign, and every time we say something slightly critical about his French, someone says, oh, but he's not that bad. It comes from French-speaking people in Quebec, outside of Quebec. So
what's going on there, Dan? Why do you think that's happening?
You know what? I still, again, I was exchanging with with a family member from Eastern Quebec. Doesn't even speak English. They were saying, no, his French is fine. His French is fine. What we need right now is the banker guy. So the excuse the French or the poor French skills or the maybe inadequate French language skills for his financial knowledge. It seems to be something that's set in voters' mind right now. So I have very little expectation about big criticism on his French. The other thing is, I think because of the way he's perceived here, and when I say here in Quebec, it feels to me like it limits the amount of attacks that the other leaders can push towards him. Because I think if you go too hard, it may make him look like a victim, and that may turn into his advantage or into his opponent disadvantage.
You know, Dan, you're giving hope to politically ambitious Anglos with high school French quality everywhere. You're really giving us hope that we can.
Let's do that thing in French.
That they have future.
No, but it's a thing. I've never seen that before. Quite frankly, I've never seen such a reaction, and it's usually it's visceral in Quebec when someone massacre or is not super good in French. People react pretty strongly, and this time around, it's just not there. So that in itself takes one big chunk of the equation out of the French debate.
Well, and it speaks to another interesting thing, which is expectations. I was speaking to somebody, former political operative in central Quebec, who was telling me that in their experience, when they talk to people who aren't super politically plugged in, they've heard that his French is so bad that when they actually hear him speak, they're like, well, it's not that bad after all. And this does make me recall one of the classic debate moments, but not in a debate, actually outside a debate in 2015 when Corey Tenike said if Justin Trudeau showed up with his pants on, he would defy everyone's expectations, right? He set the bar so low. And of course, Trudeau wound up surpassing it. And as we all know, 2015 formed a majority government.
I bet you he regrets that sentence. He's been regretting that sentence ever since.
And he's found a whole new level of, criticisms and remarks to potentially regret this year.
And for anyone who has not been following the Conservative infighting or can't recall back to 2015, Corey Tenike, at the time, senior advisor to Stephen Harper, now campaign strategist for Doug Ford, and he has been taking some runs with some spicy language at how the Conservatives are handling this election campaign.
We'll probably talk about the expectations of Carney in a bit later on the English side. But I want to talk about going back to what Dan said earlier about the expectations that debates don't matter. I want to talk about that expectation. You know, I used to agree with that big time. I mean, I remember in 2015, I was talking with a colleague of mine. This is during the Alberta election, the one that the NDP won, this big transformative election. And I remember talking with my colleague before we were going to do a live blog, and we were saying, like, debates don't tend to matter. Like, we keep talking about the 80s, John Turner versus Brian Mulroney, and we keep talking about those ones and knockout punches because there hasn't really been these big moments since then. And then we watched the one English language debate in the 2015 Alberta election. It was NDP leader Rachel Notley, a relative unknown, versus Jim Prentice, the new premier of Alberta, the Conservative, the former federal minister of industry, and he just biffed it. He had one of the classically worst performances we've ever seen in a debate. There was one really remarkable moment where he and Rachel Notley started talking about taxes, and listen to what he said.
20% corporate income tax, which would give us a higher corporate tax rate than BC
what
or
are you
Ontario
talking about? Our proposed corporate tax rate is 12%. I'm not sure who's briefing you, but I just do need to clarify that
10% to 12%.
Absolutely incorrect.
I know that math is difficult, but
no. If you're saying
10%
it's 12%,
to 12% is a 20%.
I know that math is difficult. That line echoed over the whole election. You know, the old dynasty PCs were struggling back then, but things really turned, and Rachel Notley ran away with that election. It was one of the most remarkable debate moments I've ever seen, and I remember sitting with my colleagues afterwards saying, oh, no, this debate mattered. So there is the potential for if somebody does something really bad or somebody really shines, debates can matter.
Well, and we have, I think, a more contemporary example that speaks to how much the debates can matter in Quebec, even though it wasn't the French language debate. Right? Which is what happened in just the last federal leaders debate in 2021. I can hear you laughing, Dan. So
this is crazy. This is crazy because there was nothing out of the French debate the night before. We expected a very tame, quiet debate. That's what we got. And then the next day I was talking to an operative from the Bloc Québécois right before the English debate. And they were saying, we're not expecting anything from that debate. We have a spot there. We're going to go do our thing, say our thing to English Canada, explain ourselves a little bit, and then we'll let the other guys go at each other, and that's usually the way it goes. And then, 2 minutes in, the moderator of the debate throws that on the floor.
You deny that Quebec has problems with racism, yet you defend legislation such as Bills 96 and 21, which marginalize religious minorities, Anglophones, and allophones. Quebec is recognized as a distinct society, but for those outside the province, please help them understand why your party also supports these discriminatory laws.
The question seems to imply the answer you want. Those laws are not about discrimination. They are about the values of Quebec.
So implying that there's a bit of a racist tone to this whole thing. Sachi Curl, who was moderating the debate, threw that question to Yves-François Blanchet, who saw it coming, grabbed it, answered, and everyone heard. It bounced back in Quebec within minutes. It was played back onto the French network, both radio, TV. It made the headlines of the papers the next day. And I've heard it from the Bloc and from the Liberals. That night, it switched probably about 8 to 10 ridings. Made a difference. The Liberals lost their majority. No, totally. Like it was huge, and it happened right before the beginning of BVA.
Before advanced voting.
Advanced voting, yeah. And so that little bump that the Bloc got right away translated into a very, very good performance into advanced voting and gave them those 8 to 10 seats that they didn't think at that point they would be able to get. So it changed things every now and then, especially in an English debate for the Bloc. That was really surprising.
I feel like we're talking a lot about can debates decide an election, and we haven't really talked about what can this debate decide this election.
Yeah, let's do it.
So Poilievre versus Carney. What are you looking for, particularly in this, Catherine?
So I think there's a few interesting things here. For Carney, right, he's significantly in the lead. So on the one hand, you're the front runner, right? You just have to try not to trip on your own 2 feet. Yes, the question of French, but generally how you comport yourself in these things. The thing that is interesting for him, and I know the public has a lot of different opinions about this, but I will say as a journalist, you see moments where he is being pressed about his policy, and you can see that he takes umbrage, particularly things around his time at Brookfield Asset Management, things about his own integrity. He does not seem to enjoy those questions. It's one thing when a journalist asks you a question and maybe they have a follow-up and then it's on to the next thing. These are 2-hour debates, right? So, and because he is the front runner, he is going to be taking punches from all sides. And for the Conservatives, too, they need the Bloc and the NDP to do a little bit better, right? Pierre Poilievre, he has said a lot of not very nice things about Jagmeet Singh in the past, but that is not what we are going to hear over the course of these 2 nights. Pierre Poilievre is going to have to focus his fire on Mark Carney, but he has to sound not too mean and nasty when he does it, right? He doesn't want to sound Trump-like. He doesn't want to sound bullying. Pierre Poilievre's numbers right now are not all that great with women who I would suggest are perhaps less likely to enjoy an overly aggressive tone. And I will just say one other thing about women, which is that in both cases, on both nights, all male cast, just male moderators, and that's too bad.
You know, I think we should clarify to people and kind of point out that this is not the first time that Carney and Poilievre are going face-to-face. There was this committee meeting in 2021, I believe it was, where Carney is brought in as an informal advisor to the government, UN person, Brookfield figure, and Poilievre is, before he was leader, was peppering him with questions. I think we have a little bit of a clip of that.
Do you support the Prime Minister's decision to veto the Northern Gateway pipeline, Mr. Carney?
I understand the veto of the Northern Gateway pipeline.
You support it?
Given both environmental and commercial reasons.
Do you support it?
I think it was sensible. I wasn't involved in the decision, but I think it was the right decision.
And yet your company has invested billions of dollars in oil companies in both Brazil and the UAE to buy pipelines. You bought billions of dollars of pipelines as a company in the last 5 years. Do you support those investments?
Mr. Poilievre, there is a global energy system, and one of the issues, I'm trying to explain a bit of how the economy works. One of the
Thank
issues,
you so much.
Well, it may help. one of the issues for this committee in thinking about a sustainable transition.
Do you support it?
It's going to be so good, guys.
I think we see two potential pratfalls for each leader, or one potential pratfall for each leader. For Carney, it's this idea of getting his back up, being a bit splainy. I mean, going back to that Jim Prentice clip, it's kind of good that he's not going to have somebody to say math is difficult to, because I think it would land worse if he said that sort of thing to a woman than a man. But the other part of it is it plays to one of Poilievre's strengths, which is that he is this prosecutor, that he can be very, very peppering with questions and very hard. And do people want to see that in their prime minister? Does he look prime ministerial if he's playing opposition leader? I mean, Paul Wells, my former colleague at Maclean's, has this great rule of politics that the person that auditions for the role of opposition leader gets it. And if he's going to be seen as the prosecutor there, people may say, well, we like him as opposition leader.
Yeah, and that's where I think you're not going to see that kind of exchange either in French or in English, because, there's too much to lose on both sides. Pierre Poilievre can't look like that because, on your point, he's going to look like the opposition leader. He wants to look prime ministerial. He wants to take a stand. He wants to probably put him on the spot. I don't think the format also works in his favor for that. It's their shorter exchange. It's going to be a little more complicated. The themes have been organized in such a fashion that you're going to be able to spend some time on maybe more embarrassing questions towards your opponent, but not that much of a lengthy amount of time. And Mr. Carney, Mark Carney, can't start explaining the way he was trying to explain there. It's too, he lost me halfway through. He needs to be a little less complicated to the people. Look at the camera, look at, reassuring figure that he's been trying to put forward. That's what he needs to play. He can't go into that kind of rabbit hole that he got into during committee hearing.
Well, I'm gonna push back a little bit on that. I don't think he can sound condescending, but I have found sometimes in news conferences he does not always explain things very clearly. And normally in political communications, you would say, well, that is not what you want. You want clarity, right? He does things like he will say, I'm going to repeat myself here, whereas politicians are trained to repeat themselves, right? Normally you wouldn't say the same thing over and over, and you would certainly never express any sort of regret about it. But I think in a time where we have come off 9.5 years of Justin Trudeau, right, who is always a very slick communicator, when the contrast to you is Pierre Poilievre, who has such message discipline, that the fact that sometimes he kind of stumbles around a little bit trying to make the point, or he's not very good at explaining a high-level technical concept, but you, as an audience member, understand that he understands it. I think, even though it's counterintuitive, that's part of what's been working with him for Canadians right now.
You're right. He needs to explain, but he needs to explain in a shorter version of what he would usually put forward in front of a board of director. He needs to make it clear. He needs to make it punchy. He needs to make it reassuring. I know for a fact that I've talked to some people who've been prepping him for the past few days, and I know that one of the challenges has been to shorten the answer and make them understandable for someone sitting at home, both in French and in English. And I was looking at him last week. They were on Tout le monde en parle, that big TV show on Sunday night.
I was going to ask about that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big thing in Quebec. They were and he didn't quite make it to that level yet. He hadn't made it to that level yet on Sunday. I found that some of the explanations were a little complicated, and even himself at some point kind of stopped and said, I think he said, "Oh, it's complicated." That's what they're trying to avoid for the debates this week.
Two things I wonder about Carney's performance. One is, do they over-prep? Does he wind up over-prepped? And I think that there's a lot of rhetoric about...
There's always a risk.
Discourse about that real reason Biden stank up that debate last June or July was that he was over-prepared and his brain just couldn't handle it. Mind you, he was very, very old, and Carney is a bit more sprightly, relatively speaking. But I do wonder about that, and if that causes him to short-circuit or try to fit too many lines in too many places and it just looks stilted and awkward. The other part is expectations. None of us expect him to be a very good debater. And this goes back to that Corey Tonight thing. There is a very real chance that Mark Carney shows up wearing pants. And I think people
literal
have high
and metaphorical pants.
Yes. Sorry, yes. I mean, who knows how big these lecterns will be and what we'll see behind them.
They're pretty big. But they're in the lobby here. I saw them. They're pretty big. You could hide behind them.
The inside scoop from Danielle. I love it. But and I think expectations that that Poilievre's a very, very good debater are high. So how do those play to him? I think people are going to be watching him almost as closely and intently as the other potential prime minister in this. So the expectations will be higher for him and maybe lower for Carney. I don't know.
The general rule is lower. You like the expectation to be on the lower side, right? Under promise, over delivered. I think it works for Carney right now. It'll be interesting. We've been talking about the dynamic between Poilievre and Carney, but
let's talk about the other parties.
During the French debate, Blanchette's going to be the one I'm watching the most because he wants to get some traction back in Quebec, and it's not doing well. He's not doing well, and the Liberals are eating his lunch. That might lead him to try to push him a little more in the corner that Pierre Poilievre would in French.
Dan, does he do that by attacking Carney, or is it something he can do on his own?
I think he needs to do it by attacking Carney a little bit, because doing it on his own, he's been doing it on the campaign trail, and it's not working as well as he was hoping to. And it's clear that he wants to focus on Carney and his lack of knowledge, or his perceived lack of knowledge of Quebec and Quebec culture, and Quebec society, and the way people perceive certain things here. And that's what they're going to be trying to put him on the spot for during the debate. I don't know if it's going to work, but that's definitely what I'm going to watch him for that, for sure.
Putting him on my Alberta hat, either the trucker or the cowboy one, you guys can choose your imagination.
I'll go for cowboy.
I'll be very curious to see in that French debate how especially Blanchette and to a lesser extent Jagmeet Singh hit Carney on pipelines and oil issues, because I know that he's really demonized people or threatened. For him, it's a big attack line to say we could build Energy East, the old oil pipeline, right through Quebec, and Carney has to skate a finer line on that than the other leaders do. So how is he going to try to say something in French that he doesn't say the same in English, and does that cause real hiccups for Mark Carney? That's going to be an interesting dynamic to watch, especially in the French debate.
I don't know if Carney is going to do Carney has been very, very careful, the energy corridor, but when you talk to him about it, he talks about hydro, and he's not closing the door on the pipeline, but he's not opening it super widely in Quebec. Yves-François Blanchet is definitely against the whole project, but he also has to work with public opinion that has changed in Quebec, right? If you believe some polls, there's a healthy 60, 65, 70% people who are open to the conversation. So we're not the same spot than we were 10 years ago. And so you can push that, but you can push it just to a certain level. I don't think you're going to hear something different in French that you'll hear on that in English. There might be a little more talk about it in English, but I don't think Carney, and I don't think he has anything to gain by saying something different in French.
Well, and he'd get busted for it too, frankly, one night after the other. At least the journalists are watching both nights. It's worth noting, though, for the Green Party, I think Jonathan Pedneau gets points basically just for showing up, right? Yeah. He's there, he shares the airtime with the four other leaders, and that's a win for the Green Party, which is struggling for relevance right now, right? Just getting that amount of attention on a national stage is a win. For Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, he has got to try to save the furniture here,
but what do you do, though? If you're...
Yeah, this is what I don't know either.
Who do you hit? Who do you go after if you're Jagmeet Singh?
Again, I think in some ways you have to convince Canadians that they can safely vote for you, that you are a place, even in the midst of this divisive time, that they can feel safe parking a vote with the NDP, right? That you can vote with your convictions if you believe in the NDP and the things we're offering and all these pitches that they've been making around them being the force that was pushing for dental care and pharmacare. But that is the argument they've been making the whole election campaign, and it's true that the numbers don't reflect a big result. Maybe you're telling people they can vote for their local candidate. You truly are just trying to save the furniture, but you got to do something, no?
The thing is, are they going to listen more in a debate setting than they've been in the campaign trail? Because it feels like his message is falling flat. He's been pushing that, and he's been trying to convince Canadians for the past week and a half that they can vote NDP to send a strong NDP contingent in Ottawa to keep whoever's going to get elected, on their feet. It doesn't seem to be translating into any kind of polls that I've seen in the past couple of days. What exactly do you say to make it land better on debate night?
There's this delicate dance. On the one hand, we were talking about this earlier, that Poilievre has to kind of lift the tide of the bloc in Quebec and the NDP nationally to peel progressive votes off the Liberals because people are flocking to them. And Jagmeet Singh has to be, he's probably going to want to take some digs at Poilievre. But he also knows, and the NDP know, that if Poilievre starts rising in the polls again and it overtakes the Liberals, that some of those remnant voters still sticking with the NDP are going to flock back to Carney. So there's this delicate dance, and yeah, he's in a pickle. It'll be really interesting to see, when there's stakes are high for people like him and he gets desperate, that's when people do sometimes really big swings for the fence, risky things.
Well, and that speaks to where I want to end this conversation. Will you guys indulge my nerdy little political heart for a minute here? Sure. Let us listen to perhaps the greatest knockout punch in the history of Canadian federal debates. 1984, Liberal leader John Turner, Progressive Conservative leader Brian Mulroney. And this was one of those moments that really did sort of shape the political contest. It's one of the great examples of a knockout punch. As Pierre Trudeau was on his way out as Liberal leader, he made all these patronage appointments, right? So when a party gives basically people who have fundraised for them or whatnot, gives them different plum positions. And Pierre Trudeau basically had John Turner sign off on these. Turner signed off on some of his own. And this wasn't regarded particularly well by the public, right? Because you're basically giving your friends cushy jobs. And it came up in the debate. This was a big moment for Mulroney. Let's listen.
Well, I've told you and told the Canadian people, Mr. Mulroney, that I had no option.
Well,
Truman, your next question.
You had an option, sir. You could have said, I am not going to do it. This is wrong for Canada. And I am not going to ask Canadians to pay the price. You had an option, sir, to say no. And you chose to say yes to the old attitudes and the old stories of the Liberal Party. That, sir, if I may say respectfully, that is not good enough for Canadians.
I had no option if I was able to.
That is an avowal of failure. That is a confession of non-leadership. And this country needs leadership. You had an option, sir.
What a beautiful moment. What a beautiful debate moment. And I remember that because Brian Mulroney was my MP back then. I was tiny, and my parents were watching that debate. And I remember that particular moment. It's engraved into my memory.
Okay, so thumbs up, thumbs down, guys. We're going to get a knockout punch in the next 2 nights. Jason, what do you think?
The fact that we keep talking about 1984 as the knockout punch 41 years ago shows me how seldom these happen. I would also say, if we're going back into history, to more recent history, Kamala Harris in last fall mopped the floor with Donald Trump so badly that he didn't have a second debate. And she lost the election anyway. So there could be a knockout punch, could be a good moment, bad moment, but it may not ultimately matter.
Dan?
I don't think there'll be one. I don't expect one. I'll watch anyway because I need to watch. But I'm not, especially that late in the campaign, I don't expect anything huge.
Let me just sneak in one last point. I think this could be the last best chance for the tides to turn in this election.
Well, listen, so with that level of drama, who doesn't want to tune in? I'm going to Montreal. I'm going to be covering them. I'm excited.
I'll see you here. That'll be fun.
Yeah, it'll be excellent. And I admit, the odds of a knockout punch, not that high, but I still think this is going to be fascinating. And guys, we can talk about how it all went next week. If it does indeed change the course of this election, or if it's a distant memory, we'll move on to other things. How's that for a deal?
You two have fun in Montreal.
We will. We'll miss you, Jason. Okay, that is it for House Party this week. Thanks to my co-hosts Jason Markusoff and Daniel Thibeault, and thank you to the production team, Caitlin Crocker, Jennifer Chevalier, and Carla Hilton. Be sure to give us a follow in the podcast feed for The House so you can catch both House Party and my other show, The House, every week. That is 2 shows in one feed. The House will be with you on Saturday, and House Party will be back next Wednesday with another big, burning election question.